Good evening, Canada. How are you doing out there? My name is Tyler Bieber, the host of Rouge Radio, and we got a fantastic show for you tonight here. We have Defensive Lineman Moton Hopkins of the Montreal Alouettes. He's going to join me in just seconds here. And then later on, after we talk about the CFL a little bit, we're going to have on James Katsuras. We had him on a couple weeks ago, and he was great then, and he'll talk to us about the CIS coming up here. Of course, he is with SportsEh. Another crazy week in the CFL, despite the, what was a little bit of a lopsided scores all around. Of course, it wound up with the Montreal Alouettes on Sunday, defeating the Saskatchewan Roughriders in what was a fairly entertaining battle, despite the score being only 17-12. And of course, Moton had a first-hand glimpse of that, being with the Montreal Alouettes. And so without further ado, we're going to get right into things here. And I'm going to bring in Moton here. And Moton Hopkins, defensive lineman, Montreal Alouettes, thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So with the Montreal Alouettes, you formerly were with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers when you broke into the league in 2010. And you've been involved in several charitable activities, whether it's in Montreal or whether it's back home in Texas. And one of the charities that you're involved with in Montreal is Friendship Circles of Montreal. And it's a group that works with special needs and autistic children. And just talk to us about the kind of things you do with the children and the kind of things that you look to help them out with.
Well, I've been up there a few times and, I've toured the facilities and got to meet a lot of the kids. Just spend time with them, autographs, pictures. Right now what we're doing is we're trying to raise funds. They're having a walk on October 27th, I believe it is. And so their goal is to raise, $500,000 for the organization to keep it going. And I'm just trying to raise awareness about that right now and raise funds. I have a little page together, and we're taking donations and everything. And it's just to keep the facility running. They have a great place there with rooms for the kids, activities, kitchens. They have a gym, sporting events, and everything. It's just a great group of people over there.
Now, I understand that your brother Matthew, he has autism, and did getting into a group like this, did it push you a little bit further just because of the situation with your brother, or was it something that you were always looking to help out with when you can in your spare time?
I mean, my brother definitely pushes me to want to do more for people and children with autism. Living with it firsthand, I know it can be difficult for the families and difficult for them too, because they don't always have a place where they can go that's fun for them, or they have activities they can do or friends that they can hang out with. And so I understand the importance of it, and I definitely, it's a passion of mine because, it hits so close to home with my little brother having, mental disabilities as well. So that definitely pushes me and drives me to do more.
And then, of course, back home in Texas, you're a board member of a nonprofit organization. It's called the 34 Foundation. Just talk to us about what you do with that and what the 34 Foundation promotes.
It promotes education for high school seniors. Pretty much what we do is we have events, golf tournaments, we do fundraisers, and we give a couple scholarships. They're small scholarships. We're a small group, but scholarships to high school seniors in the San Antonio area. Just so they can, for books or for tuition or for anything. We understand that education is important, and it's kind of based on an athletic background as well. It's for Andre Booker, who passed away. He was a football player at Texas State in a motorcycle accident, and his father started the organization. And that's something he wanted to do with his life, was to give back to the children in the community and promote kids that, yes, sports are important, but also your education is as well. And we do that in the San Antonio area.
And one of the things that strikes me the most about Canadian Football League players is how generous you guys are in giving back to the community and stuff like that. And it seems in every city that we can find one or two players, or even more than one or two players, that are out there every day, in their spare time after practice and whatnot, trying to give back to the community. And it's really amazing because obviously Canadian Football League players don't make a lot of money as compared to the National Football League. And you don't exactly hear a ton about NFL players going out and reaching out to the community. Of course, they do that stuff, but it seems to be more prominent in the CFL. Is there anything that your organization, be it Montreal or in the past with Winnipeg, that they do to help promote players in the public and help get them out on their feet in the community and help out in that regard?
Oh, definitely. Montreal does a great job of giving us options and putting us in positions where if they want us to get out there, they understand that the community supports the team and we should do the same to support them. If us going to talk to somebody brightens their day and it just takes a few minutes or whatever, it's more than worth it. We're more than just athletes. We're entertainers, and we're here for the community and the people that support us. And it's kind of just a revolving circle. They help us, we help them.
So last year before training camp, you had a blood clot. That I was reading the article by Rick Moffat, and it's quite fascinating. You had a blood clot that could have taken your life if you stepped on a plane when you were bound for training camp in 2012, and just talk about that and the process that you go through to find out about the blood clot and what would have happened had you actually stepped on the flight.
Yeah, I got the blood clot about 2 weeks before I was supposed to fly to Montreal. Pretty much I was having some issues breathing and some pain in my chest, and it got to the point where I couldn't really move. So I ended up going to the ER, and they found it on a CAT scan. And, they pretty much said if I would have gotten the plane or if I wouldn't have came in when I did, it could have killed me. It's kind of a scary thing. I was healthy one day, and the next day, I was having some issues breathing and then talking about death. It was a really hard process, having to sit out a year and obviously dealing with the blood clot, having to get on blood thinners. I had to actually retire from the league, and God willing, I was able to come back. I actually have a filter in my chest right now, heaven forbid if another blood clot occurs. But it was an up and down process. My family and friends and everybody back home were very supportive of me. The team was as well. Jim Popper, general manager, always stayed in touch with me. So did the coaches back then, and so my teammates. So it was definitely a hard time, but thankfully I'm back and was able to get back on the field.
So getting back on the field, obviously you are playing now, and what kind of process was it for you in terms of getting over the blood clot and training and getting back into, your normal routine of things so that you are able to perform at the level that you are when you do step on the field?
It was a slow process at first. I wasn't able to do a lot of the training and intensity that I'm used to because being on the blood thinners, if I get hit in the head or, get cut or anything, there's the threat of bleeding out. So I had to take it very slow, which is hard for me because I'm hard-headed. And, I just had to take it day by day. Once I was off the blood thinners, I kind of kicked it in pretty hard. And I had a few months before the season to get myself ready for it, and then went into camp with the new staff and, was able to do all the right things to stay. And it was, it was difficult at times. But, it's definitely worth it to be back up here and playing again.
Now, your mom was sick in 2008, and she almost passed away herself. How has she helped you deal with, your recovery and what happened in 2012, and how big of a role is she in your life to this day?
Oh, she's a huge role. Both of my parents are, her and my father. The fact that she went through everything she has and is still dealing with some issues, and she puts a smile on her face, or she still, she'll do anything for us. You know what I mean? She goes in and out of her way. She takes care of my brother Matthew. It's just, how can I complain about anything when she works as hard as she does and she does everything she does? So, it kind of just, there's a standard that's been set by her and my father. You know what I mean? Stuff happens at times, but you just got to push through it. You pray about it, and the family's there for you. So you just keep doing what you have to do, and it'll all work itself out. So that's kind of how I live my life by, and it's helped me out so far.
It's just an incredible story to me with your mom or even with your brother and dealing with autism and how you have overcome and persevered through so much in your life or with your family to still play professional football. And I think it's truly admirable and something that if you're just starting out in football, in youth football as a young kid and looking to, take that next step, that a player can look to a guy like you and, you may not get every single rep on the defensive line every single game, but you make an impact when you can, and I think it's a great start for a young kid to look at a guy like yourself and get some inspiration from your story. So I commend you on coming back from the injury and from the blood clot, and I think it's been great to see you back out on the field.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's good to be back.
So dealing with the 2013 Montreal Alouettes now, of course, the season has been well documented with Dan Hawkins no longer being the coach and Jim Popp stepping up. How has the transition been made from Dan Hawkins to Jim Popp?
There's a whole, the season's not going the way we would have liked it or we thought it was going to go at the beginning of the year. But, guys are buying in, and we've been buying in since day one, and it's a process, with the transition of different coaching staffs and the injuries that we've had. And, we're still together, we're still fighting. And I think the victory this past week kind of pushed us in the right direction. I know we're going to build off of that. So, we're still transitioning, still fighting, and still pushing together and playing our best we can every week.
Now, you mentioned the injuries, of course. Anthony Calvillo is well documented. The team is without Jamel Richardson as well. How big of an impact is it in the locker room when you lose a Hall of Fame quarterback like Anthony Calvillo and one of the best receivers in the game in Jamel Richardson?
It's tough, and I want to say it's tough in the sense that we know how hard those guys work and how hard they worked in the off season, and we feel for them that they're not able to be out there with us. And so, we understand that's how the game goes. Not to sound harsh at all, but and guys step up. You know what I mean? It's the next man in. And the same thing that happened with me when I sat out. They brought guys in, Cash and Scoot, that are amazing defensive linemen. And that's just how the game is. But yeah, the biggest thing is we feel for them, and hopefully those guys will be back soon and it's stronger than ever.
Now, of course, Mark Trestman went to the NFL and with the Chicago Bears, and he has brought a little CFL flavor to the NFL. Of course, the Bears are currently 3-1. Have you had the chance to sit down and watch Mark Trestman's Chicago Bears each week, and how do you rate what he's done so far?
I was able to catch one of the games, and I think he's doing a great job out there. I never had any doubt that he wouldn't be successful just because of the kind of guy he is. And his standards of everything. So I'm elated for him. I'm so happy he's doing well out there, and I hope they end up winning the whole thing this year.
When you watched the game, was there anything that you noted specifically on offense, perhaps that maybe you've seen across from you in practice that Mark Trestman took from the CFL to the NFL?
I would say his attention to detail. He has the guys. Not that they weren't doing it before, but you can tell that these guys are structured, that they're doing all the extra little bits, the little things that make the big difference in a play, And he had us doing that here, and I know he's taking that over there, and they're doing well with it. So I really hope that they do it really big this year because he deserves it.
So I mentioned that you started with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 2010, and of course this year they're kind of going through something similar that was the case in 2010 when Paul LaPolice was the head coach. They had a little bit of a down season. Is there anything that maybe you've seen that could be similar to that 2010 season, and anything that maybe you noticed that perhaps things could turn around for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers?
Oh man, it's so tough, since I'm not there. And I've been able to see a couple of their games on TV, but it's just across the league, and anytime anybody has issues, it's just little minor things you have to work on, whether it be penalties or little things, the execution here. There's 12 people that have to do a job, and if one person messes up and everybody else does it right, it could be an issue. So I don't know if there's anything exactly that I could see that needs to be fixed or needs to be changed, but I mean, you know, they're working on it over there, and I don't know. Hopefully, they can turn it around.
So just going back to Sunday against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and of course, you guys played them earlier in the season, and they were without Corey Sheets. He'll be back this upcoming Friday against the BC Lions. But is it any easier for a defensive lineman like yourself knowing that a team without their star running back is mainly going to pass the ball, because they did only give the ball to Chris Garrett, the running back, 5 times in that game? So does it make your job a lot easier?
No, I wouldn't say it makes it easier. They have lots of threats in the passing game, and Darren Durant is an amazing quarterback, a guy that's been doing it for a long time. So I wouldn't say that it makes it easier. I mean, you know, you never know what their game plan is going to be. They didn't end up running the ball as much as we thought they would, but you know, I know Chris Garrett personally. He was with me at Winnipeg as well, and he's a more than capable running back. So I had it in my mind. I was ready for him to get the ball a lot and, you know, do what he does. But, it just didn't end up that way. So you can't really think that way, because if you do, then you do get burnt, you know, in one area that you weren't ready for. So you just got to prepare for everything every week.
Moton Hopkins, defensive lineman of the Montreal Alouettes. I'm going to let you go here, but is there any information, maybe a website or something that our listeners can go to check out your charitable endeavors?
Oh, yeah. If you guys want to go to Friendship Circles of Montreal, and then you can go to The Walk, and then my page, I guess if you want to donate to me or any group on there, is Tackle for Autism under my name. Or you can also go to my Twitter page at thehopkins95, or Instagram as well, and all the donate information is on there.
All right, Moton, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and best of luck throughout the rest of the season.
All right, thank you so much.
Moton Hopkins, defensive lineman of the Montreal Alouettes. His Montreal Alouettes will be in Edmonton this upcoming Saturday in the Canadian Football League Hall of Fame game, and that'll take place on Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And I mentioned it earlier, just an incredible story to come back from near death and a blood clot and get back on the field. And he's not a guy that's going to play on every down, as I mentioned, but when he is on there, he makes the impact that he does. And, you know, it's just, like I mentioned, a tremendous story of Moton Hopkins and his family and everything like that. So once again, we thank him for coming on the show, and that was a fantastic segment courtesy of him. And please do be sure to check out his charitable endeavors, as he mentioned, Friendship Circles of Montreal, as well as the 34 Foundation back in Texas. And as he mentioned, you can find him on Twitter at thehopkins95. So we're going to rewind the clock a little bit here and head back to Week 14 in the Canadian Football League. And we're going to start out with some of the players of the week from Week 14. And offensively, it was Chad Kackert. Of course, he made a huge impact against the Edmonton Eskimos and a huge impact in their comeback effort against those Edmonton Eskimos. He piled up 155 yards, which included a 49-yard touchdown run as the Argonauts came back to defeat the Edmonton Eskimos 34-22. And for the first time in CFL history, won 4 consecutive games on the road. That's not just 4 games in a row on the road and, you know, mixed in with a home game or 2. That's 4 games in a row, all of them on the road. The Argonauts took care of business, and they're the first team in CFL history to do that. Defensively, Adam Bighill, again, another big week, as he was a huge part of the 53-17 win for the BC Lions over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Of course, had the fumble return for a touchdown on the first offensive play of the game, where he ran back 30 yards as Max Hall threw a lateral pass to Will Ford. He couldn't quite get the handle on it, and Adam Bighill was there to scoop it up and take it the distance. Another great game from him, and one of the fine young players that the Canadian Football League has to offer. And back on special teams was Trent Guy of the Toronto Argonauts, and Trent Guy had a big game for the Argonauts returning kicks. He had 131 yards, which included a 65-yard return late in that first quarter against the Edmonton Eskimos. He, of course, is a former Montreal Alouette himself and getting a little bit of a chance in Toronto with Chad Owens out due to injury. So, again, we've seen it all around the league, that next man up thing. And Moton Hopkins just talked about it. You know, Scooter Berry goes down, he steps in, or even last year he goes down, Scooter Berry stepped in for him. Alan Michael Cash, you know, these guys. And we see it with the quarterbacks, Zach Collaros, Bo Levi Mitchell. They just step in, they get it done, and it's truly a testament to the great talent that we have here in the Canadian Football League. And then rounding out the players of the week for this past week 14 in the Canadian Football League, the Canadian of the week, Calgary Stampeders slot back Jabari Arthur, who caught 6 receptions for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns in the Calgary Stampeders 35-11 win over the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And of course, being it is October now, the players of the month were announced, and we'll just run through those quickly here. Adam Bighill, once again, he was the defensive player of the month. He was a fantastic linebacker there for the BC Lions, and when you combine him with Solly Elamilian as well as Corey Banks at the nickel, I mean, it's just a dangerous combination for any team going up against them. It's going to be a dangerous combination coming up here through October, rolling into November, and towards the run to Regina and the 101st Grey Cup game. Offensively, it was Zach Collaros, of course. Well-documented story of Zach Collaros stepping in for the injured Ricky Ray. He was the offensive player of the month for September, throwing 8 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Of course, he was the starting quarterback for the perfect September. 4-0 on the road were the Toronto Argonauts. Rene Paredes, we had him on a few weeks ago. He was the special teams player of the month for September. Calgary Stampeders all-star kicker, product of Concordia, and his Stings lost narrowly in overtime to the McGill Redmen this past weekend. We're going to talk with James Katsuras about that coming up here in about 10 to 20 minutes or so. And of course, the Canadian of the week, he's probably going to be the Canadian of the year once again. He is the outstanding running back of the Calgary Stampeders, John Cornish. And catching up to Corey Sheets a little bit, as Corey Sheets has been out with injury, and he will be back, as I mentioned, this upcoming Friday as the Saskatchewan Roughriders head into a must-win game in Vancouver against the BC Lions as G. Roy Simon returns to Vancouver, and that is going to be a fantastic game, no doubt about it. A little bit of other news that came out today. A couple of fines. We'll start with Cleon Lang of the Toronto Argonauts. He had a hit that was called reckless and dangerous by the Canadian Football League, and it was to the head of the Edmonton Eskimos quarterback Mike Riley as he was going to the ground and was being sacked. And of course, Riley has a concussion, and he may not be able to go this Saturday against the Montreal Alouettes, and it's really unfortunate because he has been so outstanding for the Edmonton Eskimos despite their record. He's just done a great job, and he has that warrior mentality, so it'll be tough to see Mike Riley out if that is the case. And another fine was to Saskatchewan Roughriders quarterback Darian Durant. He was fined for violating the CFL's social media policy, and he sent what was called an offensive and inappropriate tweet in response to a fan. And, it's a little bit of a give and take question here because fans, they're going to overreact. They are fans. They think that, you just pick out things on the field and you simply correct them. Well, that's not the case. It's a process. All these players are professionals. All the coaches are professionals. The managers, the executives, everybody on a Canadian Football League team or NFL, any pro sports team, they are professionals. And unfortunately for Darian Durant, he stepped over the line a little bit there. Players do need to be held to a higher standard, and it's just a bit of an unfortunate situation there, but it's done and over with, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Darian Durant will, of course, move on and look to defeat the BC Lions this upcoming Friday night, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern, as we have a doubleheader. About time. On Friday Night Football. First, it'll be the Toronto Argonauts and the Hamilton Tiger Cats at 7 p.m. Eastern, and the Toronto Argonauts can lock down first place in the Eastern Division if they are able to defeat the Hamilton Tiger Cats at home. And of course, as mentioned, BC will host G. Roy Simon and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And G. Roy Simon, he broke the record against the Montreal Alouettes on Sunday for all-time receptions in the Canadian Football League. He is the king, passing former Alouette slotback Ben Cahoon. As I mentioned, Saturday afternoon, it's going to be the Canadian Football Hall of Fame game. The Edmonton Eskimos hosting the Montreal Alouettes. That'll be at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And then following that, rounding out Week 15 in the league will be the Calgary Stampeders and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Of course, I don't think you're going to find anybody who's going to pick Winnipeg to win this football game, but they have shown in the past. They beat the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They may be capable of pulling off an upset, but you kind of have to doubt it with the current makeup of the team coming off a 53-17 loss to the BC Lions, and of course before that a heartbreaking defeat to the Edmonton Eskimos in overtime. So just winding back the clock here to Week 14, we'll go through the games a little bit here before we bring in James Katsuras of SportsEh to talk about the CIS. And so we'll roll back to that game I just mentioned, 53-17, the BC Lions at Investors Group Field, running over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And Thomas DeMarco, he doesn't have the flashy stats. He doesn't have 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns and whatnot, but he just gets the job done. And for a backup quarterback, what else could you want, right? I mean, Travis Lulay, we know all about Travis Lulay, most outstanding player in 2011 with the Grey Cup champion BC Lions. He can get it done in any which way possible, but when you're a backup quarterback, I think you get asked for the most out of anything to protect the football. And Thomas DeMarco has done that against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Hasn't turned the ball over, hasn't thrown an interception, throwing touchdowns. He was 15 of 21 in this game for 170 yards, but that's all he needed to do. A, because it was a blowout. I mean, they were up 33-14 at the half. But also B, it doesn't matter who you're playing, whether it's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers or whether it's going to be the Saskatchewan Roughriders either the week previous or this upcoming Friday at BC Place Stadium. Protect the football. And if you protect the football, chances are you're going to win more often than you don't, right? And that's the biggest thing. When you're a young quarterback making your first start, making your second start, or as it will be Thomas DeMarco's third start in the Canadian Football League. And Travis Lulay will miss the next 2 games. It was first diagnosed as 2 games, then he was re-evaluated, and now it'll be an additional 2 and maybe even a little bit longer. And the BC Lions could buy some time with Travis Lulay because if they beat the Saskatchewan Roughriders on Friday, they're going to have a huge advantage for that home playoff game, and they may not even have to worry about Travis Lulay playing other than maybe a quarter or a half in the final game of the season just to get his shoulder back in gear and get his arm throwing and, get some live game action before the playoffs come. But what Scott Milanovic, Jim Barker, they've turned it around. They won the Grey Cup in November. They keep rolling, and it's almost like the Calgary Stampeders. It doesn't matter what you throw at them. They're going to find a way, and that has been the way of the Toronto Argonauts under Scott Milanovic. Even last year, they didn't have a great season, but whenever they got down, they seemed to always get back up. And I believe they had a 5-game losing streak somewhere in there, and they didn't let it affect them. They just bought their time, came back at it, punched the Montreal Alouettes in the mouth, and won the Grey Cup against the Calgary Stampeders. And they seem to be doing it again with Zach Collaros. So it's amazing, as I mentioned before, how when one guy goes down, and it doesn't seem to matter who it is, Ricky Ray, Nick Lewis, Jamel Richardson, Anthony Calvillo, even the Montreal Alouettes, despite their record, they always seem to stay competitive in their games. Even when Anthony Calvillo went out and they lost that first game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders in August, I believe it was, they were competitive in that game. They led late and just didn't happen to finish the game. But they're always in the game. It doesn't seem to matter what happens. You always find a way to fight back. And it's truly a Canadian Football League unique situation here that a team, it doesn't matter what happens. Starting quarterback, Hall of Fame quarterback goes down. They just find a way to bounce right back up and keep playing. And Toronto Argonauts, again, they're leading the East. They have a chance to clinch on Friday against the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and so we'll see if they're able to do that. And then, of course, rounding out the week was the Montreal Alouettes 17-12 victors over the Saskatchewan Roughriders. A little bit of a slower game in terms of a score. It was 1-1 after the first quarter. It was only 4-3 at the half for the Montreal Alouettes, but it was entertaining as it went on. Saskatchewan took the lead, but Montreal fought back and ultimately win the game thanks to Josh Nicewander, who did not throw an interception. And I just mentioned it with Thomas DeMarco. If these young quarterbacks don't turn the ball over, you're going to be so much better off, because you're going to have a very good chance of winning a football game. And it turns out it's the veterans. Darian Durant, he threw 3 interceptions. Max Hall, despite the fact that he's only in, I believe it was his 4th start, he still has that NFL playing experience, over Thomas DeMarco, who's pretty much a raw player in terms of starting a football career. And they threw the interceptions. They turned the ball over. And here's the Montreal Alouettes. They hang on and defeat the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who, they lost Corey Sheets. He will be back, but they have to try and help out Darian Durant. You can't throw the ball as much as he has in the past 3 games and expect to win, because it's just not going to happen. And Moton Hopkins, I asked him about it, if it's a little bit easier for a defensive lineman knowing that you can just rush the passer, knowing that they're not going to run the ball. He did admit that it's not just because, if you get into that thinking, they're going to go bam, they're going to run the ball. Maybe it's a 30-yard gain and you're down in a hole on the field. But, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, they just didn't try to run the ball with Chris Garrett. He had 5 carries in this game, and Corey Sheets would probably have 5 carries in 1 quarter. Now, that's, of course, because Corey Sheets maybe has established himself a little bit further in the league than Chris Garrett has, but, they just couldn't get it going on the ground, and because of that, Darian Durant threw the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th amount of pass attempts he has ever thrown in his career throughout the time that Corey Sheets went down against the Toronto Argonauts, and then in the 2 games that he missed against the BC Lions and the Montreal Alouettes. So, we'll see if the Saskatchewan Roughriders, they gotta win. They gotta figure out something here, because, as I mentioned, they're down in a hole here. They gotta fight back and get a win over the BC Lions if they want to stay in contention for a home playoff game and have a home playoff game in front of their fans with the Grey Cup in Regina. And it seems to be slowly slipping away. But can the addition of Corey Sheets back into the lineup help them out? We'll see on Friday night. But we're going to switch things up here, and we're going to start and talk about the CIS. I'm going to bring in our CIS guest tonight, and that, of course, is James Katsuras of SportsEh.ca. James, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, Tyler. Great. Thanks for having me back.
So, of course, this past week, it was a big event of the week in Ontario Conference, Western Queens. You at the game. What were your initial thoughts going into the game in terms of who would come out on top? Of course, the game was at TD Waterhouse, and were you looking for a big Western win, or were you thinking Queens might upset them at home, or what were you looking for?
Well, I mean, this was the big matchup that everybody was anticipating, and I guess it was tough to call. There was no clear-cut winner. I mean, Western had the big advantage of it being homecoming, but they were also without their top running back, Garrett Sambito, so there was a question of whether Yannick Carew would be able to handle the expanded workload, even though he's proven to be a great running back. I actually picked Western going into this game, but it wasn't the most confident of picks. And we were actually, we had the privilege of sitting at the game and watching ourselves. And, I mean, it was a great experience, but it was a little anticlimactic, I have to say, because Western jumped out to that early lead, and Queens pretty much shot themselves in the foot, and that's just not it's not a winning formula when you're playing on the road against such a good team like Western.
So you mentioned the early lead that Western got in the game. Queens did fight back a little bit. Is there any sign of that fight back, that they tried to claw back in the game, and they did as recently as 8 minutes left in the 4th quarter. Western, of course, did run away with it at the end, but that fight back by Queens, is that an encouraging sign for them, or will going back home potentially, lift their spirits up moving forward here?
Well, absolutely, it's encouraging, because somewhere down the line they're probably going to face the same Western Mustang team again, probably in London, because they lost this game. To me, again, I mean, Western scored early. Queens had the ball on the 5-yard line, and then running back Jesse Andrews fumbled it. That was the first big mistake. The second one was a pick six by Billy McPhee, right? I mean, you can't get away with mistakes like this. And another thing that I'd like to point out is Will Finch was curious to see how he would play in this game, because he's been unstoppable up till this point, and he didn't have his best game statistically. and yet he still made the winning plays. I mean, he didn't have his best passing numbers, but he rushed for over 100 yards and he got a touchdown and he got the big first downs when he needed to. And then with the help of Haru, they were able to pull it off. Whereas with McPhee had maybe his best statistical game of the season. He had an 87-yard reception. He went out of bounds in the 5, and then they went for it on 3rd and goal, and he just overthrew his open receiver in the end zone. It would have been a big change in the game. So overall, I think it's very encouraging for Queens. I mean, they played terrible in terms of mistakes and all that, and yet they still, like you mentioned, they still had a chance late in the game. But they're definitely going to have to clean it up if they face Western again.
You mentioned the stat line. Will Finch in the game was 18 of 31 for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. Billy McPhee, 22 of 36, 332 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Now, we've talked about Will Finch in the past. What do you see for Billy McPhee going forward and perhaps a future in football?
Well, the thing is, like we said last time, the odds are stacked so heavily against these guys. I mean, even like the person who we consider has the best shot, maybe a guy like Finch or Cayman Shutter, right? I mean, it's overwhelmingly against their favor. But I mean, you know, McPhee, he has the size. He's the same size as Finch. He's a little lighter. He has a cannon for an arm, maybe the strongest arm in the CIS. And this is his 4th year. I mean, I think we forget that with Danny Brannigan, he didn't develop into the superstar right away. It took him a while. It took him until his 4th year to be the guy. So McPhee's numbers are much better this year. Touchdown and interception ratio much improved, whereas before, years past, it was 1-1. Now he has 8-3, right? So I think we'll see a lot about what he's about. We'll see a lot of what he's capable of from here on out. If Queens runs the table, they have a tough game against Guelph at the end of the season, but if they can get it done and if he can take this team far, then who knows? Because this is when players prove themselves and when they show what they're capable of.
Rounding out the OUA, Toronto defeated Carleton 50-10. Guelph defeated Waterloo 41-19. Ottawa ran over York 46-16. And in a close one-point battle, Windsor defeated Laurier 26-25. And this next game that we're going to talk about briefly here, maybe not one of the more high-profile games that you'll think of, but an interesting finish. And that, of course, was McGill and Concordia, a game that went to overtime. Both teams scored in the 50s. But Concordia, they scored a touchdown after McGill made it 53-46. And Concordia went for the win. They went for 2, but they didn't get. Was it the case of, do you think, James, Concordia trying to just get on board this season, get a win under their belt, and trying to defeat McGill in that fashion, or what did you think about that?
Well, first of all, I mean, like you said, not a high-profile game, but what a game. I mean, anybody who watched this, I mean, wow, 53. This is the second time Concordia has played McGill close, actually. It was only 32-19 in week 2. And now Concordia, I mean, head coach Jerry McGrath knows this is a team. They were 0-4 going into this game, right? You have nothing to lose. You can't play for a tie here. I absolutely loved what he did. It's just like when we talked about Coach Towers with Saskatchewan last week. These are the plays that define you as a coach, and this is how you get your players to rally around you. You know what I mean? Like, you show that faith. It didn't work out, but hey, you know, I mean, they're 0-4 anyways. I mean, I love it. I love that killer instinct. I mean, what a game. I mean, Sammy Rassi kicks a 35-yard field goal for McGill as time expires. Otherwise, Concordia would have walked away with the win. Guimond Malta had a huge game again. Their wide receiver, Casey Cook, 294 receiving yards, right? I mean, he's like in the top 10 of all time. It was an incredible game all around. Francois Dessereau for Concordia, he had 5 total touchdowns. He looked really good, so I mean, that's promising for them. And then something to note for McGill is Jonathan Collan, who hasn't looked too good. He was replaced by Pierre-Luc Dussault, and he had a great game, 538 passing yards with 3 touchdowns. So it'll be interesting to see what McGill's capable to do from here on out. And I think this is a rallying point for Concordia. I mean, they might not win a game this season, but I think it was important for their coach to go for it there.
McGill, of course, tied in a 3-way tie for second place with Bishops and Montreal at 3-2. Bishops was on the losing end to Laval 46-38, and Montreal went down to Sherbrooke 16-12 in another close defensive game after coming off a 16-9 loss to Laval. Heading into the Atlantic Conference briefly, St. Mary's defeated St. FX 25-13 and Acadia over Mount Allison 40-9. And in the Atlantic Conference now, a 3-way tie for first, Acadia, St. Mary's, St. FX, all 2-2. It'll be interesting to see who comes out on top in that conference there. Of course, Acadia is the defending 2-time champion in that conference. Heading over to the Canada West now, Manitoba defeated Regina 34-15. Saskatchewan eked by the UBC Thunderbirds 17-12, and in a huge blowout, Calgary hung up 76 points and 846 yards as they run right through the Alberta Golden Bears 76-21. Now, James, of course, Alberta, they're not a very good team. They haven't won in a couple of years here on the football field. Of course, they beat UBC twice via forfeit. But is it any more, impressive for a program like Calgary, that they're well documented under Blake Neal? Is it any more impressive that they just go out and hammer a team like Alberta no matter, what Alberta is not capable of on the football field, and putting up those near 850 yards? How impressive is that?
Well, I guess the Dinos think they're the Western Mustangs on offense or something. But I mean, this game means nothing. Like them blowing out Alberta, like you mentioned, they haven't been the strongest of defensive teams this year. But just overall, the bigger picture. I mean, where do you start with Calgary? Like, what they've been able to do, they're like the Laval of the Canada West ever since Mill took over. He took over in 2006, and they've won 5 straight Hardy Cups, which is unbelievable. And, they lose all these guys to the CFL. They lose Stephen Lumbala, running back. They lose Mike Edom, Jordan Vendone, Lyndon Gaydosh, who was drafted in the NFL. So you have to expect some sort of regression from them. And what happens? Their star quarterback, Eric Jalewski, he goes down as well. Andrew Buckley steps up. He does amazing. Mercer Timmis, he steps up. He leads Canada by a wide margin in rushing touchdowns. He could set a record this year. It's like a next man up mentality, and because Coach Neal is such a great recruiter and he's such a great motivator, it doesn't even matter to these guys who's there. They just always seem to get it done. And I'm very impressed because when we talked last time, I actually picked against Saskatchewan for the first game because I assumed that there would be a changing of the guard, but I won't foolishly do that again. I can't pick against Calgary until someone beats them.
So the top 10 was released yesterday, as it always is on Tuesdays, and Western, after the big win over Queens, tops the charts. They get by Laval in the rankings and head up to number 1. Laval just drops 1 spot to number 2. Calgary moved up to number 3 from 5. Guelph was up from 6 to 4. Queens, after the loss to Western, drops from 3 to 5. Saskatchewan was up to 6 after their win over UBC. Montreal dropped to 7 from 4 after their loss to Sherbrooke. They're on back-to-back losses now. Bishops, McMaster, and Manitoba maintain their 8th, 9th, and 10th spots. And is it really a surprise for Western to be moving to number 1? I mean, they play a ton of tough teams in that Ontario Conference and Laval, maybe not so much in the Quebec Conference. Is it really a surprise to see Western eventually move up to number 1, having maintained that perfect record?
No, not at all. I mean, like you said, they've looked very impressive against weak teams and against strong teams. And when you face the number 3 team, when you have the second ranked and the third ranked teams and they face each other, I think the winner deserves to move number 1. And again, I mean, in the bigger scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. This will all get settled eventually. But, no problem with that. Western being number 1, I think they deserve it.
Now, McMaster, they're still in the top 10 despite a 2-3 record. And I guess the question is, how does a team that is below 500 stay in the top 10? Is it a lack of quality teams that can be in the top 10, or is it their reputation of being in the Vanier Cup the past 2 years, or is it even having lost to the teams that are currently ranked 1st, 4th, and 5th for their 3 losses this season?
Well, obviously, I think it's a little bit of everything. But with McMaster, I think the team that has the big beef here is Windsor. Windsor's 4-2. They're coming off 3 straight wins. So if any team deserves to be in there instead of a 2-3 McMaster, it would be them. Because, and their 0.4 point against differential, it's almost plus 100. They've looked really good. Now, mind you, they have a game against Western coming next week. So, you can maybe count that as a loss. So I think Windsor will finish either 5-3 or 4-4, whereas McMaster, they're sitting at 2-3, but their next 3 games they should all win. So it's like I said last time I talked with you, they'll probably lose one more, which they did to Guelph, and they'll close out 5-3. But at this very moment in time, you look at them at 2-3 and they're still in the top 10. It is a bit of an eyesore. I wouldn't replace them with McGill because McGill has beat Concordia twice. I wouldn't necessarily replace them with Ottawa either because Ottawa has only beat easy teams, right? So if you go based on strength of schedule, it's not completely crazy to keep McMaster there because the teams that they have lost to are all in, the top 5. of the CIS. I think the one team, and I think because they haven't played as many games yet, but I think they're definitely going to be a team to watch out for, and they could jump in after this week, is Acadia. 2-2, they face St. Mary's. I know they lost to them before, but if they take this one, I think they can jump in there if another team loses.
And you mentioned McMaster's schedule. They have Waterloo, they have Laurier, and they have Carleton coming up here in their final 3 games. So a very likely 5-3 finish, and perhaps a 4th, maybe a 5th spot in the Ontario Conference playoffs as we move forward. And moving forward into the coaching here a little bit, James, last week on SportsEh.ca, and if you can check out a bunch of great articles by James or the other guys there at SportsEh, just a fantastic website, that's SportsEh.ca. Top 5 coaches in the CIS, and they were ranked. Number 1 was Glenn Constantine of Laval. Number 2 was Greg Marshall of Western. 3 was Blake Neal of Calgary. 4 was Stefan Potasic of McMaster. And 5, former Edmonton Eskimos head coach Danny Machocha. He is with Montreal currently. Marshall and Machocha, they've been CFL head coaches. They know a little bit about the Canadian Football League, having coached there. A couple other guys have played there. Is there any future for one of these 5 individuals in the Canadian Football League? You know, Ottawa's coming back. Montreal will likely have an opening with Jim Popp, very likely not staying on the sidelines there. Perhaps Winnipeg if they part ways with Tim Burke. Or does the success at the CIS level and the job security that they have there, is that going to be more likely to keep them at their respective programs?
Yeah, see, this always happens because there's always that itch by the pro teams to get that, hot, successful college coach or university coach just to shake things up, see if they can imitate the same success at the pros. And we see it happen. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it isn't. Greg Marshall tried his hand with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He won Coach of the Year, but then, things happen. Personally, if I was a coach, as long as, you're making enough money, as long as, obviously money talks and it'll lure you away if it's enough. But I don't see why you would want to go anywhere if you're a guy like Constantine or, any of these guys, because you have it so good here. And the difference between the pros and university is recruiting. If you have that reputation, you've built that program, then you can have continuity because players will keep coming, you can keep recruiting, and there's no problem. Whereas you go to the pros, you have to draft properly, you're dealing with pros, all these other issues. So it's a totally different ballgame. It's so hard to predict success going to the pros. But sometimes the ego gets the better of these guys, and they want to see if they can be as successful there as they were in university and college. So if there are position openings, right, and there are spots available, and these coaches, they have the desire to go. It could happen. I could see it happening, but I personally wouldn't go anywhere if I had a good thing.
Of course, we've seen it from the NCAA to the NFL as recent as this past year with Chip Kelly from Oregon, Doug Marrone of Syracuse. So it'll be interesting to see if perhaps anything comes about with the CIS and these coaches heading towards the CFL. And now we're going to look ahead to next week a little bit. And 4 games, we're going to pick one from each conference here. We'll start with the Atlantic Conference. You mentioned the Acadia Axemen. They're on the road here at St. Mary's. What do you expect from Acadia and perhaps St. Mary's at home here?
Well, this game will help us sort out the AUS a bit because, like you said, there's a 3-way tie there with 3-2-2 teams. It's a rematch of Week 1 when the Huskies came out with a close win. But here's the issue. St. Mary's is a mess on offense. They're alternating between Jack Creighton and Ben Rossong at quarterback, and their numbers are abysmal. 2 touchdowns, 9 interceptions between the two. Dawes hasn't been able to get up and running 35 yards per game. They're living off their defense. Their MVP right now, and maybe the MVP of the AUS, is Rob Jubinville, who leads the CIS with 8 sacks. He had 4 sacks last week in their win against St. FX. And in the first game against Acadia, he had 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. So I think the key for Acadia is to neutralize him if they want to win. And I like Acadia in this game. Quarterback Evan Brown, he's playing under, Kyle Graves' shadow, but he's played very well. They have, a veteran wide receiver, Taylor Renaud. Thomas Troop's playing well, and they have their own great defensive lineman, Jesse St. James, right? So I think it'll be a slugfest. I could see it being a low-scoring game. And, it's important for both teams because you want to have the upper hand here because this is, the second and last time they face each other. So,
no marquee matchup in the Ontario Conference this week, but for the first time since 1998, the Panda Bowl is back, and that is Carleton and Ottawa. It will be on Sportsnet 360 this Saturday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. What do you see coming here from this game between Carleton and Ottawa?
Well, I mean, I see Ottawa taking this one. No offense to Carleton. I mean, this is amazing. It's a momentous occasion. Hopefully the atmosphere will live up to it. But I think, Ottawa's coming off a big win against York. I mean, the trouble is that, Colbin got knocked out of the game, but, the replacement, Derek Wendell, he looked incredible. He threw for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. Galanders is his usual self. He has a ton of receivers. So I don't think Carleton is ready to take down Ottawa. And the thing is, this game is way more important for the GGs. I mean, they're sitting at 3-3. If they win this one, 4-3, and then they have one more game against Windsor, which will be a huge contest. Even if they lose that one, they'll be 4-4 and probably get into the playoffs. But maybe they can get better positioning, better seeding if they knock them off. So this is a game Ottawa has to win, so that they could forget the residue from last year's 2-6 season. Whereas Carleton will just want to compete in this one. Hopefully, show well and the big, the amazing atmosphere in the big game.
In the Quebec Conference, it'll be a rematch. Last week, it was in Montreal. Sherbrooke clipped Montreal 16-12. This time, it's at Sherbrooke. A big rematch here. Some fairly big implications. Of course, Sherbrooke fell behind early in the season in the conference, but now they're starting to claw their way back in. Do you think Sherbrooke's going to be able to climb it up and even it up here with Montreal at 3-3 record-wise?
Well, this is a very interesting game because we all wrote off Sherbrooke early in the season with those losses to Bishops. We didn't realize that Bishops was going to be a really good team, but they were like 1-point losses, both of them. And then, you can't fault anybody for losing to Laval. And now Montreal's coming off 2 straight losses, right? To Laval, which again, I mean, it was a close game, no shame there, but then to Sherbrooke last week, 16-12. So I think the important thing here is that Jeremy Roche, he didn't have a good game last week, and they still won. He only had 261 yards, 19 for 32, no touchdowns, and an INT. And yet they still managed to find a way to win. Their star wide receiver, Seb Blankard, 7 catches for 110 yards. I think the problem with Montreal is ever since Rotran Sene went down, their star running back, they don't have any balance on offense. And, defense, they stand on their heads, but they can only do so much. At some point, they're going to need to find some consistency at quarterback. Someone else is going to have to carry the load. Their offense is going to have to move the ball because 16-12, they only allowed 16 points to Sherbrooke, 12 points on offense. Not going to get it done.
And then, of course, in the Canada West, you mentioned it a couple times here last time I had you on. It was Saskatchewan and Calgary. This time they're moving on a little bit to the east and in Saskatoon and the Calgary Dinos at the University of Saskatchewan Huskies. You picked Saskatchewan last time. Where are you heading this time?
Well, I have to go with Calgary this time, but that's not to say that I would be shocked if Saskatchewan pulled it off because, again, this is the Canada West. Saskatchewan is playing at home, in front of that crazy home crowd. It was a relatively close game in Week 3 when they faced off. Burko didn't have the best of games, 306 yards but no touchdowns. He had his interception. And more importantly, Dexter Janke and Shane Buchanan, their combo at running back, they only had 78 combined yards. So they're going to have to develop more of a ground game so that they can eat a little bit of a clock because you don't want to get into that mode with Calgary where you let Mercer Timmins just run downhill. They play with the lead because you're not going to be able to stop them. The guy's a wrecking ball. So I think if Saskatchewan is to pull this game off, they're going to have to get to an early lead, and they're going to have to keep Calgary's offense off the field because, let's face it, they've looked unstoppable until now.
James Katsuras, SportsEh.ca. You can follow him at JKatsuras on Twitter. That's JKATSURAS. At SportsEh on Twitter, as it's spelled SPORTSEH. James, thank you so much once again for joining me. Fantastic to talk to you all, as always, and once again tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tyler.
James Katsuras, SportsEh.ca. Definitely check him out. I just realized I've been ignoring somebody who called in here about 16 minutes ago, so I'm going to bring him in here just quickly with 90 seconds left in the program. Who am I speaking to?
Hi, this is Mike from Minnesota.
Hi, Mike. How are you doing tonight?
Doing good, sir. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Sorry, I was just flicked back onto the studio here and realized I was ignoring you. But only have about a minute left here. Was there anything that you were wanting to talk about quickly?
Yeah, no. I just started getting into the CIS. And I just actually wanted to ask you and your last guest if you guys thought Montreal would be able to challenge Laval, and if Guelph has any chance of challenging Western at all.
Well, Montreal, they're interesting because they have that experience with Danny Machochi's coached at the CFL level, of course. Last year in the past they've beaten Laval, at home, but other than that they've struggled against Laval. They lost to Sherbrooke, they've lost to Laval. It's always hard to say with Montreal what they're going to do, but I still think Laval's going to clean it up. And now Sherbrooke is hosting Montreal this upcoming week. I think Sherbrooke might be able to clip them again, and Montreal is going to be behind the 8 ball here. So, I still like Laval. I think Montreal slipped a little bit. We'll see what happens there. But I'm going to say Montreal is probably going to wind up playing Laval in the playoffs, and I don't think it's going to end up too well there for them. And then as far as Guelph, the tough Ontario conference, it's so well documented. Western, of course, leading the way. Queens is right there with them. I think Guelph is in tough, but if they get home field advantage here and they can get a win under their belt in the first round of the playoffs, or even if they can get a bye, because the top 2 teams do get a bye, if they get that bye, then they're going to be so much better off playing at home. And I still like Western, I still like Queens, even McMaster might be able to fight it back a little bit here, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Guelph is able to pull something off here, and we'll see how it winds up for them.
And quickly before the show's done, is Stan Sene for Montreal, is he out for the year, or is he going to be back soon?
I believe he might be out for the year. I'm not 100% sure on that, though.
Okay.
All right,
yeah,
Mike.
I thought he'd be back. Okay. Thanks. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. I'm sorry I missed you there earlier. If you call back in next week, I'll get you a lot more airtime here with whoever we have on, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
There it is, CIS, CFL. Fantastic show, as always. Moton Hopkins, CFL guest, James Katsuras, CIS guest. Great stuff once again. We'll be back next Wednesday. I believe it will be for an hour. Once again, thanks for joining me tonight. And as always, you can follow us along on Twitter at Rouge Radio. I myself am at Tyler A. Bieber, just like Justin, in case you're wondering. No relation, though. So once again, thank you so much for tuning into Rouge Radio. Have a good night.